I would argue that one of the best examples of an urban Cinderella story is right here in Leipzig. Once the fifth largest city in Germany, it tumbled into steep decline after German reunification in 1990, gaining it the unfortunate title of the capital of poverty. Residents left the city en masse, opting to either leave Eastern Germany altogether or reside in new developments outside the city boundaries. And by 2000, 1 in 5 homes within the city were vacant. And then everything changed. In the new millennium, the German economy started gathering steam and jobs flowed back into the center of Leipzig. Those once vacant properties were demolished to make way for new housing developments like this one. And as new immigrants chose to make their homes closer to the heart of the city, Leipzig's suburban sprawl actually started to reverse. Today, it's one of the fastest growing cities in Germany, adding around 2% to its population every single year. But Leipzig isn't alone. This rags to riches transformation story is incredible. But this type of urban renaissance is actually happening all over Europe. After decades of slowly creeping outward with the creation of new suburban commuter belts, Europe's cities are growing denser once more and providing a potential boom for the environment, as well as our well-being in the process. So, let's take a look. Now, I've shared before that I actually grew up in a part of the United States that's often referred to as the Rust Belt. A part of the country that was once dominated by industrial manufacturing experienced catastrophic decline after the 1950s, leading to structural unemployment, decreasing incomes, a decreasing population, and increasing social problems. Cities like St. Louis, Missouri, Alton, Illinois, Flint, Michigan, and Toledo, Ohio are perhaps the poster children for this phenomenon. But again, while this was extraordinarily devastating, it also wasn't a uniquely American experience. Between the 1970s and the early 21st century, most Western cities went through a period of what urban planners call de-densification. As societies across the global north became more affluent and car-based, low-density housing developments on the outskirts of cities provided larger homes for people who wanted more space, but still to be within driving distance of jobs and shops. The reality is that while we might like to chastise the United States for being, again, the poster child for suburban sprawl, the reality is that this trend was happening across most major cities around the world in the later half of the 20th century. Here in Leipzig, this has been especially pronounced, although perhaps a product of a different set of socio-political and economic circumstances. As an old trading and university city, as well as an industrial city, Leipzig again was the 5th largest city in Germany before the Second World War, with a population of about 700,000. During the war, however, the number of inhabitants fell sharply, and in the decades that followed, Leipzig became one of the few major European cities with almost a continuously declining population. By 1989, only 530,000 people still lived here. And after the opening of the wall between East and West, the city lost more than 30,000 inhabitants in the following 14 months alone, in a mass exodus to the more prosperous Western states. Coupled with the rapid and transitionless integration into the EU and the world market, as well as the economic and political shock therapy, the city was deindustrialized by about 80%, and mass unemployment followed. By the turn of the century, Leipzig gained the unfortunate nickname as the capital of poverty in Germany. And like I said at the start of this video, by the year 2000, 1 in every 5 homes in Leipzig was vacant, which is extraordinary. And while, again, Leipzig has its own unique set of issues that were of serious consequence to the urban fabric, Leipzig wasn't alone in experiencing this de-densification. Many cities, which have their own unique story and circumstance, had also seen an exodus of residents in previous decades. Cities like London, Stockholm, and Naples all experienced de-densification despite having different economic, political, and geographic factors. So consider this recent study by the University of Humboldt in Berlin. After charting the density trends of 331 European cities, 60% became less dense between 2006 and 2012. Urban centers, which were once the epicenter of culture, society, and prosperity, were experiencing a mass exodus of its populations to the suburban periphery, trading in their city apartments for larger homes with garden plots and double-car garages. Again, that doesn't sound so dissimilar to what we had experienced in the United States after the Second World War either. But what I think is really interesting is what happened next. In that same study from Humboldt University, researchers noticed something peculiar. After 6 years of steady retraction of the population density, in the second half of the dynamic, the 6 years following, things suddenly flipped. Between 2012 and 2018, only a third of the cities in the sample were constantly de-densifying. The picture across the majority of Central, Northern, and Western Europe showed that cities were getting denser, growing steadily in population size while barely growing at all in terms of their overall urban footprint. In Leipzig, where I'm reporting from in this video, from 2011 to 2020, the total increase in population was around 96,000 people, or almost 17.4%. This means that Leipzig grew by almost as many inhabitants in the 2010s as it shrank in the 1990s. For some time in the late 2010s, Leipzig was actually the fastest growing major city in Germany, the example of a swarm city. That's right, the city that was once nicknamed the capital of poverty in Germany was now the picture-perfect example of urban growth and renewal. So, what exactly happened here? Well, in short, a heck of a lot of investment. In the 1990s, the state invested about 1.5 billion euros into the renovation and modernization of the existing housing stock. In addition, billions more were invested in the repair and new construction of infrastructure such as transport, communication, water and sewage, schools, and childcare centers. Investments were also made in the environmental sector, for example, in the rehabilitation of contaminated facilities, the rivers, and the Karl-Heine Canal. In the meantime, the city of Leipzig also kind of went on its own little PR campaign in order to reinvent its public image, proclaiming themselves the boom city of the East and formulating an image campaign with the slogan, "Leipzig is coming," as city officials intended to attract investors. And it worked. The first positive results of this extensive support was seen at the end of the 1990s or beginning of the 2000s with the arrival of Porsche and BMW car factories in Leipzig. Companies also in the logistics and service sectors have also settled in the north of Leipzig, and with these new facilities came jobs. Around 80,000, in fact, were created since 2005, which led the unemployment rate here to fall from 21% in 2005 to just 6% in 2019. But here's what I think is really interesting from an urbanist perspective. While Leipzig was experiencing this boom in population, the city itself actually wasn't expanding. Instead, again, they were re-densifying the urban core. The vast majority of these new residents were moving to the largely redeveloped Gründerzeit inner city districts, which are characterized by pre-war architecture that you see here, not new developments. And because there were so many vacant properties within Leipzig, many investors, both foreign and domestic, saw this as an opportunity to purchase existing real estate, rehabilitate it, and rent them out to new residents. And yes, because I foresee this being a common comment on this video, this is in fact pretty textbook gentrification, which for sure is a double-edged sword. But categorically, many housing properties within Leipzig were in a state of disrepair. And the private investment in upgrading housing specifically not only helped to elevate the standard of living in Leipzig, but also reduced crime rates, improved infrastructure, and encouraged further economic growth within the city. But for sure, that doesn't come without some trade-offs. Specifically, you're going to worry about things like the relocation of existing residents and the general rate increase in rents throughout the city. But that's actually why a social conservation statute has been in effect for 6 areas in Leipzig since 2020, which aims to prevent complex renovations and changes of use and the dismantling of living space so that wealthy tenants don't displace the local population. But I do think reinvestment in Leipzig, particularly when you're reinvesting in existing spaces and upgrading infrastructure, in lieu of just simply creating new developments on the outskirts of the city, does have a very net positive ripple effect for the rest of the city. And that's actually why I came here to report on this specific subject. But first, I want to say a big thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video and keeping my online identity safe with one of the best VPNs available. If you don't know what a VPN is, it stands for Virtual Private Network, and it encrypts all of the data sent between your computer and the internet so no one can steal your personal information. And while I definitely enjoyed the freedom of movement within a reunited Germany and around the EU to be able to visit these cities and produce these videos for you on my channel, it also means that I end up spending a lot of time on public Wi-Fi, which can be a goldmine for hackers. But a VPN can be used for so much more than just security. It can also be used to unlock content that isn't in your area. It's super easy to change the virtual location of your computer and get virtual access to a completely new content library. A very handy tool when researching international topics. And if you don't already have a VPN, be sure to check out Surfshark. We recently made the switch because it's the only VPN service that allows you to have one account for multiple devices. And you can use my code, type Ashton, to get 3 months free. Plus, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So there's no risk to try it out. So give Surfshark a try and click the link down below in the description of this video. If cities are getting denser, it means that these new people must be living on land that was already developed within the city boundaries. And most likely this is to be done in a combination of vacant lots being filled, more people living in shared flats and apartments, and existing inner-city land being converted to denser housing. And here in Leipzig, it was really a combination of all 3 of these factors. While this inner-city densification was taking place, the development of natural or agricultural land on the outskirts of Leipzig was dramatically slowing down, making the city more compact. Which is great, because the European Union loves more dense cities. In 2011, the European Commission introduced a no net land take by 2050 initiative. That meant that any urban expansion had to be balanced by converting developed land into green areas. In practice, this means that cities should be becoming denser as authorities are encouraged to redevelop land rather than developing outward. Which makes perfect sense for somewhere here like in Europe, where we've seen the population stagnate over the last couple of decades, which makes it really difficult to kind of politically justify urban expansion and de-densification projects. And I don't want to let the United States off the hook. Europe is only really just one chapter or so ahead. US population growth is slowing, and it is expected to stall before the end of the century. And so on some level, the US could do well to pay attention and be proactive rather than reactive if this is the future ahead. But keeping cities denser isn't simply a benefit just to not encroaching upon natural land. Although, don't get me wrong, that is definitely a benefit. The major benefit of cities is that they're extremely efficient and low-impact places to live. And studies tend to agree that urban living, at least in higher income countries, is better for our carbon footprint. One study from 2009 found that New Yorkers register 7.1 metric tons of CO2 each, compared to the US average at the time of 23.9 metric tons. And more recent data from the UK shows that Greater London has the lowest per capita emissions of any local authority. Other studies have found similar results for Austria and Finland, as well as other US cities. And while I am definitely not trying to say that urban cities specifically are somehow better than us living off the land in a rural lifestyle, it might be the best solution for the vast majority of us because, again, the whole world population isn't suddenly going to live in rural areas and become farmers. For the vast majority of us, it makes sense that cities are a lower carbon place to live. If you can concentrate people into one area, you can deliver services to them much more efficiently. Imagine, for example, how long it would take for a postal worker to deliver 500 letters in a village, compared to the same number of people all living in a high-rise. So the same is true for other resources like water, electricity, and waste disposal. And most importantly is that people who live in cities are much less likely to drive to work or drive to go get groceries because they probably also have access to a great public transportation network, which further helps to reduce their overall carbon footprint. But to be fair, there are some negative aspects as well that are worth mentioning. Of course, the most efficient way to pack as many people into one place doesn't always lead to the happiest places to live. We know that crowded cities can be hotspots for pollution, and despite there being more of us, we do tend to live lonelier lives. But there are all kinds of things we can do to make cities a more comfortable and nicer and friendlier place to live. We can plant more trees and set aside urban green spaces that act as biofilters, as well as community spaces. We can reduce the number of cars on the street, or like I suggested in a video just last month, reduce the size of our streets and use that extra space for bike lanes, outdoor restaurants, biosphels, or parklets. And these are all things that are happening right here in Leipzig. So I think it's time I show you perhaps my favorite example right here. Like I mentioned earlier, Leipzig's housing market was characterized by high vacancy rates, which were highest in built-up inner-city areas with Wilhelmine architecture. The socio-spatial segregation patterns reconfigured after the first half of the 1990s. Leipzig had approximately 70,000 vacant apartments and about 3,000 brownfield sites. Needless to say, the city authorities here in Leipzig were faced with a pretty hefty challenge. They had to figure out a way to take all of these brownfield sites and derelict areas and turn them into something that the community actually wanted. Green spaces, community spaces, and spaces that could serve the very young and the very old. After 1990, calling Leipzig's southeastern district of Reudnitz-Turnberg not very popular among the residents is an understatement. These areas were known for having urban development deficiencies, highly polluted residential areas, housing vacancies, traditionally weak social structures, and a lack of attractive open spaces. So this district in particular was targeted for urban development funding in the 2000s. In the formally defined Leipzig-Reudnitz development area, 79% of the public spaces were being rehabilitated, and 73% of the properties were either completely new or modernized. I mean, check out this before and after of the former Eilenberger-Bahnhof area. Today, one of the most beautiful green spaces in the city, the Lena Voigt Park. At 800 meters in length and 80 to 130 meters wide, the park is located in the middle of Reudnitz, but also forms a green axis from the city center to the landscape of the city's surrounding area. This connecting function will become even more important once the park is further developed as part of the Parkbogen-Oost concept, called PABO for short. An approximately 8-kilometer-long pedestrian and bicycle path and active area which encloses the east of Leipzig in an arc. The centerpiece of this green belt is the disused eastern S-Bahn arc, the so-called S𝗨𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗧 as a connecting element of several districts in the east of Leipzig. The park arch, at least in this area, will be transformed into a promenade with special attention given to the equal coexistence of all mobility groups in the new public space. Once fully completed, it will complement the public facilities in the east of Leipzig with around 70,000 square meters of green space, biotopes, cycle paths, and sidewalks with lounge areas, as well as an extensive range of sports and play opportunities with an inclusive and integrative character. Think of it as Leipzig's version of the High Line in New York City, except this one will be 4 times as long. The project is an exemplary response to structural changes in the city, and in addition to being a pretty ambitious revitalization, the community participation in the entire design and planning process is quite remarkable. So although this particular project is still years away from being fully completed, it really shows a genuine reinvestment, not only in the city housing, but also in the community spaces that these new neighborhoods and the families that live there serve. And I think that is incredible. In fact, since the S𝗨𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗥𝗧 opened, new types of residents have been moving into the area. The housing market offers have evolved, and Reudnitz is spoken out about as a trendy district. Today, especially the S𝗨𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗥𝗧 north of the park is dominated by economically and socially established households, mostly young families with an average to above average income. The building stock has almost been completely renovated, and the vacancy rate here has fallen below 2% by as early as 2010. New construction projects are being implemented on an ongoing basis, and increased ownership of property can also be observed. Now again, don't get me wrong, new construction is typically complemented with a rent increase. And anytime you're trying to attract new people to come and you're building new things and you're upgrading the existing infrastructure, prices are going to go up, and sometimes that can come at the risk of pricing out the existing residents of that particular neighborhood. But again, there are measures that the city is taking to help combat this. But I think the big picture of what is happening in Leipzig, especially in Reudnitz, is remarkable. By transforming brownfields and derelict areas into vibrant green spaces, the neighborhood regained a rich cultural life thanks to its diverse usage that includes social events. The neighborhood has developed a new urban flair that's expressed through new businesses, such as this espresso bar located across the street from the park. In the wider area, there's now a Whole Food store and several Spätis, which are especially popular among students. And all of this is to say that these type of reinvestments are having a lasting, significant impact on the quality of life experienced right here in the city center. In a survey on the quality of life in 83 European cities and urban regions conducted on behalf of the European Commission in October of 2020, Leipzig was voted the second best city to live for young families with children. And it also scored well in other categories, such as inhabitant satisfaction with the residential area, cultural facilities, green spaces, and air quality. Quite the Cinderella story, don't you think? Now, for sure, what's happening here in Leipzig didn't happen overnight. And it took a lot of money, a lot of investment, and a lot of that investment had to come not just in jobs, but rehabilitation and reinvestment in the city itself, its infrastructure, its housing, and of course, reinvestment in public spaces just like this one. But if Leipzig can make such a dramatic transformation in just the span of 25 years, then what's stopping other cities from seeing incredible change in a short period of time? And so this is actually the point in the video that I would like to ask you about what your experiences have been like. Like I mentioned, re-densification of urban centers is a trend that we're seeing across Europe. So I would love to hear from you, if you're European, down in the comment section of this video on what you have experienced in your city and what trends you're seeing in the urban areas that you happen to live. But if you're from the United States and happen to also be watching this video, or any other country that has also seen systemic exodus en masse from the urban centers to the suburban periphery, what do you think of what's happening here in Leipzig? And do you think something similar could have a positive effect on cities near you? So please let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!